my mother died, I basically shut down. I stopped living. I gave up my job. I didn't work for 2 years. I literally could not function. And then she shared that one day she was listening to the radio and she heard Pastor Joel come on. And he started to talk to her about life and about God and about living, right? Living. And she heard the word of God, and she started to listen more and more, and she had a healing. And so we can have a miraculous healing right now in this very moment, right? Because God's in this moment. Or we can learn some processes to help us heal. So what I'm going to share with you today is based on the Grief Recovery Handbook. This is not my work. It is my work that I've been doing for 30 years. And the authors are John James and Russell Freeman. And I was going to bring the book, but I didn't bring it with me. I'm sure Deborah has one in her car. I'm trained to do this work. Reverend Steve Philo is trained to do this work, and Reverend Deborah Creighton is also trained to do this work. And we all work with veterans at the VA doing this work. Veterans with alcohol and drugs, substance issues, all the things that were spoken about before. I love how God works. We talk about humility, then we talk about, all these issues, these human conditions, right? And now we're going to talk about grief. What do we do with grief? So what is grief, right? What is grief? Does anybody know a definition of it? It hurts, right? It hurts your heart, right? So the two definitions based in the book is grief is the normal reaction to loss. I'm on this page. Grief is the normal reaction to loss and the realization that we have no control of change. But we do have control over ourselves. And so the definition actually of grief is very interesting. It's on this page. All these feelings, right? So you have a whole bunch of feelings happening to you at the same time. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. The end or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So there's many examples I can give you for that. So I know Deborah talked about moving here from Georgia, right? To another state across the country, and moving can be a loss because it's a change in her behavior, in a familiar pattern. She's not seeing her kids every day. She's not with her family. Another change in behavior is a divorce. A divorce is a loss. You're not coming home to the same house. You're not seeing the same people, right? All kinds of mini losses in a big loss. And they all conflict. And so one of the examples I like to use is being a caregiver. I was a caregiver for 3 years, working for the Rogue Valley Manor when I put myself through ministry school. And I ministered to the elderly. That was while I was going to school. And I had the opportunity to witness elderly people pass away. I worked in hospice, and I noticed that as a caregiver, when you're caring for someone who's sick for a long period of time, that it takes its toll on you, right? You get tired, you get depressed, you get lots of things you might not even be aware these things are happening to you. But then when the person passes, you're like, relief, right? Okay, there's a relief. So I just ministered to my cat of 16 years. I did hospice, kitty hospice. And the kitty passed away 2 months ago at 1 a.m. in the morning. It was miraculous because God is in the midst. God is always in the midst. Nobody dies alone. And even with an animal. And when the cat's life passed from its body, it was completely peaceful. It was so peaceful. It was like a little baby kitten. And the first thing I did was just go, I was relieved, right? But then I was like, but I'm going to miss my cat. Like, I'm sad, right? So I have all these conflicting feelings happening inside of me at the same time, and that's grief. That's what we call grief. Unfortunately, that grief doesn't just go away. It doesn't go away. Every time you have another loss, it brings up the prior losses, and to the point of it accumulates, and it accumulates negatively. And so if you have a bunch of losses that you haven't processed and you have another loss, I absolutely believe that the reason we have suicide in this country is because of the overwhelming feelings at the time that people cannot take and that they don't know any other way out. I think it contributes to that, I'm going to say. It contributes to it. So here's a list of 40 loss events that can happen to you in a lifetime. And of course, as we all get older, we experience more loss. Probably loss of friends, loss of family. People are making their transition. But another reason I wanted to talk to you about this was at the very bottom, if you notice, loss of a dream, loss of self, loss of faith, and loss of trust. So it's very common for people to get angry at God when they have a loss. Has anyone ever got angry with God? Right? And then people end up turning away from their faith. So they lose their faith. When you have a divorce, a big part of that, why people can't seem to get over divorces, is it's a loss of a dream, right? We were brought up with Cinderella and Prince Charming and the white picket fence and all these things. We're going to have the dream, right? And then it doesn't happen that way. So we have the loss of our dream. If we have trauma, any childhood trauma, any kind of trauma, we have the loss of ourself, right? We lose a part of ourself. And so, thank you. So anyway, this is what happens when we have a loss, okay? So as you can see, this little thing is a tape recorder, right? This is your mind. It's recording all the most joyous experiences you could have and the most traumatic experience you can have. It's actually recorded on your soul as well, I believe. So what happens when you have a loss your mind begins to review the relationship with thoughts that say, oh, I wish things were different. I wish things were better. I wish I had more time, which leads to regret the past, feel guilty, and grieve alone. And the G word, guilt, is a bad word, okay? Because it has no place in grief, because everybody is doing the best they can with the knowledge that they have at the time. So I have so many people come to me and say, well, I wish I could have done this, and if I had been there, and if I had just got to the hospital in time, or I just got there, especially in suicides, there's always that, I could have done something. I could have saved the person. And unfortunately, that's not true, because you're doing the best you can at the time with the knowledge that you have. And so that, again, is where God comes into it, because God's in the midst of all of it. Death is between God and that person and no one else. But people think that they're God, as we talked about, with having egos and being humble. So, but I also ask people when they come to see me, I ask them, what about your faith? Do you have a faith? Do you have some spiritual beliefs that might help you in having a loss? You might believe, as I do, that life's eternal, that I don't die. This is just my body. This is just my vehicle, and my spirit and my soul lives on. So that helps me a lot in times of loss. But our society has taught us different things about coping with a loss, which is this one. Is it the truth or is it a myth? So the first one is Grief just takes time. How many people have heard that myth? Grief just takes time. How many people have a loss in the last few years? Okay? Wow. How many people have a loss in the last 5 years? The last 10 years? 20 years? Okay. Look around. Grief just doesn't take time. Time is important. Time just clicks by. It's what you do with the time that's important. You have to take some action during the time. You've probably also heard other people, well-meaning people, try to comfort you, and they say things to you that address your head, but not your heart. Intellectual comments. They tell you, don't feel bad, right? Don't feel bad. Here, have some cookies and milk. What did Grandma do when you lost your pet, or you lost your bike, someone stole your bike, or things happen? Don't feel bad. Come in here and have some cookies and milk. Oh, okay, but now we have an eating disorder when we feel bad. What do we see on TV with the breakup? Let's go get the ice cream, right? Let's sit and eat ice cream for a week or a month. So don't feel bad. Don't show your feelings. That's the message they're telling you. And I love this one, and this is our society in I'm going to say the United States, is replace your loss. Replace your loss. Why do we have divorce? I don't like this person. I'm going to get another one, right? Multiple divorces. Replace your loss. Well, when you're young and you have a pet, we'll get you another dog. We'll get you another cat. We'll get you another bike. Oh, then when you're 9 or 13, a grandparent dies. And your mind goes, wait, I can't get another grandparent. I can't replace my loss. So now what do I do? You can't replace a person. This one's another myth. How many people had to be strong for others? Be strong for your mother. Don't show your feelings. You're the oldest in the family. And at the military, too, for all veterans here, I honor veterans in your service, especially this Memorial Day weekend. But veterans and men, don't feel bad. Be strong. Shake it off. It didn't happen, right? I work with primarily men at the VA. I will tell you that with all the men I work with, the number one thing of these strong warriors, these courageous men, that will get them to cry and get in touch with their feelings is the loss of their dog. More the dog, the best friend, unconditional love. A year ago, I was working with an outpatient who came in to see me about the loss of his father. That was why he was sent to me. So we started exploring some of his losses, and he raised husky dogs. He loved huskies. He had 4 of them. Well, one of these huskies had died at the vet. He went in for some routine thing, and they found something, and he had to have a surgery. And so the next morning they said, your dog's out of surgery, your dog's fine, you can pick him up in a day or 2. So he said, okay. He went to Portland on a business trip. He got a call when he was in Portland. We're sorry, your dog died. We don't know why your dog died. Wow. So this had been about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So he was beating himself up with guilt for going to the conference. He hadn't gotten over it. It'd been about 5 years. He still had 2 huskies. So when we got to the time of when he was going to pick what loss he was going to work on, he came for his dad, but it was very clear that the loss was his dog. So we actually worked on his dog. When we were done, and he felt complete, I said, so you want to come back and work on your dad? And he goes, no, I'm fine with my dad. It's like, I'm like, okay. And what I love about this process, and I highly recommend that you all get this book called the Grief Recovery Handbook, is that once you learn this process, you can go back and complete other losses. You can complete other losses. And then the last one on this list is probably all of our personal favorite. I know it's mine. Grieve alone, right? Grieve alone. Don't let anyone see you grieve. Because in our society, if somebody passes that's close to you, a family member, a husband, a wife, you have 3 days off work, right? And then you have to go back to work, and you have to put on your smile, and they call it an Academy Award-winning performance. And you have to tell everybody that you're fine, and you have to do your job. And like that lady who called into Joel Osteen said, I couldn't function, I couldn't work, I had to quit my job for 2 years, right? And then when we put on this performance and we put on this mask that we wear, then when we go home, we pull down the curtains and we sit on our couch and we grieve alone, when we cry alone. And I know I've done that. How many people have done that? Yeah. So one thing that I tell people is, we're on this one, head versus heart communication. And the little brain is telling the beat up heart, you never listen to me, do you? You never learn. Grief isn't about your head. It's not about your thoughts. It's not about your mind. It's about your heart. Your heart's broken. There's a thing called broken heart syndrome. It's actually true. I experienced it last August. My mom died 3 years ago. I'm a grief counselor. I didn't really, of all my losses, I've processed all my losses. My dad's passed away. My brother's passed away. My mom was the last family member to pass away. And I'm left, and I'm grateful that I have 2 children, but they don't live here in Oregon. So I was going on about my life, and my spiritual beliefs helped me, but my mom was my best friend, and I would go to church with her, and she'd go to the senior center every day, and I'd stop by the house after work. I'd just drive in and go home and visit with her. We'd go to lunch, and all that was gone. Well, in August, I had a heart condition, and I went to the hospital, and I was hospitalized overnight, and I will tell you that is when I started grieving the loss of my mother. And I don't cry easily. And after I was told about this heart condition, and it was also something that my grandmother had and died of, I freaked out. I had fear, I had anxiety, and I couldn't even work for 3 months. I actually had to take a leave of absence from work to take care of myself, because I'm a caretaker. I take care of everybody. I take care of you guys. I take care of my veterans, right? And I had to take care of me. And I was reading the symptoms of that broken heart syndrome, right? And it's real. I had all those symptoms. And the thing that really, really, why I was grieving at that point, and I started crying all the time. And I was crying for no reason. I'm like, I can't go to work and be crying. And it was because what I realized is my mom had always been there my whole life for every doctor appointment, every surgery, every baby that was born, right? And here I'm in the hospital now alone, and my mom's not there. And I was like, I was scared. My mom was a nutritionalist. I've been brought up with a lot of holistic health, and I couldn't call my mom and ask her, what do I do, right? What do I do? And, it was, but the good thing about it was I started to grieve. I was crying. I took time for myself, and, my clients, when they come to see me, they cry too. But when they're crying and they're sharing their memories, they're grieving. They're getting it out. And so I'm happy to say, through prayer, through faith, through God, when I went back in December, and and had another heart test, they said my heart was better. It was better. I also want to put a little plug in for New Song's Healing Room. I did go there, and I had some healings while I was off, and I felt the power, and I felt the energy, and I just saw my cardiologist about 3 weeks ago. It hasn't even been a year, and they lowered my medication in half. So you know what? This helps. This works. So, and God heals. So, okay, so how do we do this? How do we grieve a loss? We just don't cry. That's not all of it. We become emotionally complete with the loss by, number one, gaining awareness. Education, right? What is grief? How do we deal with grief? What are the myths about grief? We accept responsibility that we have responsibility. We can't control that we had the loss. We can't control that we got fired. We can't control that a person died, but we can control that we're responsible to heal ourselves from the loss, because we're the only ones that can heal ourselves. The work I do is guidance through grief. I guide people through it. I am not the healer. The person is the healer, and God's the healer. And we identify recovery communications, things that we wanted to say to the person, things we didn't get to say to the person. There's people that say, I was in prison. I didn't get to go to my dad's memorial. I didn't get to say goodbye. In divorces, we have restraining orders, right? You don't get closure sometimes in a divorce. You never see the person again. So you're left with all this unresolved emotional communication. And another part of grief is we have to take action. We have to do something with the time. We have to seek out grief counseling. We have to talk to our pastors. We have to share with somebody we trust, and we can move beyond the loss. Part of the recovery communications is here. 3 components that are very significant is we make amends. We say, I'm sorry. We review the relationship. And don't listen to your mind, because your mind will never tell you the truth. Your mind will always want to help you try to figure it out, and it's not going to tell you the truth. So never listen to your mind. You're not going to figure it out. And then there's another part where God comes into it. It's a mystery. Some of it's a mystery. You're never going to know. You're never going to know why. You're never going to know why it happened. Why did my mom drop dead from a stroke when I was visiting my daughter in California and I wasn't even here? Because God didn't want me here, okay? He wanted me with my daughter at that time. But God orchestrates everything perfectly, and so sometimes we're just not going to know, and we have to be okay with that. And so we make statements, and the forgiveness component comes into it. Huge, huge. Forgiving the person. When my mom died, I was so angry. My little girl, you know what she did? She threw a hissy fit. She's like, how dare you die, and you didn't pick me up at the airport. You said you were going to pick me up at the airport. I mean, that's what my inner child was saying. You know, she was mad, right? She's mad. So I had anger. So we have to do the forgiveness statements, and a lot of times it's not forgiving the other person. What I find with a lot of the veterans I work with, it's forgiving themselves. They have to include that, forgiving themselves. Forgive themselves. They didn't show up at the memorial. They were in jail at the time. I had one veteran who, his sister died, and he was very, very close to her, and they were young. He was in his 30s. When he did his completion letter, he actually stood up and said, this is what I wanted to read at the memorial that I didn't get to do. And so we put in significant emotional statements, and then we do this step by step by step over 8 weeks. It's not, or 10 weeks, however long it takes. Grief is individual. We don't want to compare our losses. Everybody suffers. Everyone feels pain, 100%. And then we put it in a completion letter and we share it. Now, I know that a lot of people, Memorial Day, might go to a grave. They might put flowers out, a flag out. They might go talk to their loved ones, which, by the way, is perfectly normal. You can still talk to your loved ones. I tell people we're only saying goodbye to the physical relationship that you have with somebody, but we can still have our spiritual relationship, right? So I talk to my mom all the time, and I say, Mom, I'm spending your money. Thank you. You have to have humor, too. But anyway, then it's step by step. It makes it easier. And then we put it in a kind of a goodbye letter, a completion letter. But here's the most important part. Another veteran, just this week, went through this class, not with me, with somebody else. He didn't read his letter. He did his letter. He didn't read it. The most important part is you need to be heard, right? So you could go to the grave and you could talk all you want, but if you're not heard and your feelings aren't validated, nothing's going to change. So you have to be heard. And again, with someone you trust, with a therapist, with a pastor, with someone trained in the work. I've been doing this work for 30 years because it works, okay? What it does is it's transformational. It brings you freedom, and it brings you back to the present moment. You get to live in the present moment. And I truly believe that the power of creation takes place in the now, right? The kingdom of God is now. The kingdom of God is at hand, but it is now, okay? That's where the power is. And so when I first did this, I was 32 years old, and I was going through a divorce, and I was a single parent with 2 kids, and it was my first divorce, and I was devastated. I couldn't get out of bed, and I had a girlfriend that brought me to this process, and for the first time in my life, I was in the present moment, for the very first time. And then my life started transforming. And I loved this work so much that I went and got certified in it. And as Deborah said, I'm a counselor. I've always been a counselor, counsel in substance abuse treatment. And I truly believe that alcoholism, addiction, all those things that you listed, underneath all that is the grief. The reason we avoid our feelings, we do these behaviors, these addictive behaviors, is we're avoiding our feelings. And when we can get in touch with that, we can process our feelings, we can say goodbye to that time in our life, then we're free. And I absolutely know that for people in recovery, that they have a much higher chance of long-term recovery if they do their grief work, because they've been numbing their feelings for so long, and then all the feelings come back when they get clean and sober. They don't know what to do with it, and they just relapse over and over and over, right? So I believe that the core issue of trauma and grief, underneath all these things that we do to avoid our feelings, that this is a way that we can heal ourselves. And I've seen it many, many times. I've seen the transformation. I've seen people come alive again. And I just want to end with this quote by T.S. Eliot at the back. The end of our journey will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the very first time. Wow. Thank you. Amen. Thank you. And I just want to say, if during this conference, if anyone would like to talk to me, I'm available for prayer. Amen. Huh?